Hello everybody, and a very warm welcome to our annual Diversity and Inclusion event, Engineering Change. My name is Hayatan Sillam. I'm the Chief Exec of the Royal Academy of Engineering and also very proud to be the Academy's Diversity and Inclusion Champion. So thank you all so much for joining us for today's event, which provides us with an opportunity to take stock, to connect, to regroup and to refocus on diversity and inclusion after a tumultuous year. It's not an exaggeration to say that the world is currently grappling with some of the most complex challenges ever seen, certainly in our lifetimes. And for many of those challenges, whether that be achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions, manufacturing billions of doses of vaccine, or driving in the economic recovery post-COVID, engineers are undoubtedly going to have a major role to play in providing solutions and systems to enable us to respond to those challenges. But to play that part effectively, we know from our own experience and from a now irrefutable evidence base that those engineers need to be part of diverse teams working in inclusive cultures in order to deliver better solutions that result in inclusive outcomes. In other words, outcomes that can meet the complex needs of all parts of our society. So with that in mind, today's conference addresses the role of diversity and inclusion in leadership, in systems, and in our own everyday actions to create sustainable change in 2021 and beyond. Now, those of you who know me may have noticed that patience is not one of my virtues, but in the context of diversity and inclusion, I make no apology for the fact that I am increasingly impatient for change. One of my personal learnings from this last year has been that when the imperative is strong enough, when we feel we have no choice, we can do things that are beyond amazing. We can outpace anything we believed possible. So having proved that to ourselves, I would love us to ask ourselves, are we being ambitious enough for change in diversity and inclusion in engineering? Now, of course, the traditional format for events such as this is to end the day with the call to action. But we've decided to switch that round, and I would really like us all to be thinking throughout the day about what we can do to be change makers in our own contexts. So in each of the seminars that you attend today, you'll have the opportunity to commit personally to a pledge, which will help to take the spirit of this conference and translate it into demonstrable action. And wouldn't it be incredible if by the end of the day, the hundreds of us who are participating over the next 6 hours could all have made a commitment to bring about a real change in our workplace or community. And then, of course, the real work begins to make sure we follow through on that. Today's theme, engineering change, can I suppose feel a bit overwhelming in its enormity, but it's actually just a theme that reflects today's reality. COVID-19 has forced change upon us all in the most brutal way possible, and in the process has cruelly exposed the inequalities within our society, the extent to which our personal characteristics, our background, our race and ethnicity influence our life outcomes. A year ago, who amongst us could have imagined the devastating effects in terms of both lives and livelihoods that we were about to experience, and how differently that load would be borne across different parts of society? This experience must surely drive us to redouble our determination to be part of creating a more equal, more inclusive future, to galvanise our determination to engineer positive change. As a community of engineers, we've helped society adapt to the changes brought on by COVID, whether through keeping critical services and supply chains functioning, or enabling the extraordinary digital transformation that's impacted every aspect of our lives, the way we work, socialise, educate. Engineers have brought creativity and innovation to solve the new societal challenges thrown up by COVID, such as the instrumental roles played in developing novel diagnostics and novel vaccine manufacturing approaches. We should be proud of this, but we must also recognise that further embedding diversity and inclusion in our approach to leadership, to systems, and our own personal outlook will help us to become even better at fulfilling our responsibility to society, not just in responding to a crisis, but in all that we do. One of our focal points today is leadership. And over the past year, the Academy has taken steps to ensure that diversity is further embedded in the progressive leadership that we seek to provide for engineering. Last summer, we launched an important new initiative, our Fellowship Fit for the Future programme, which includes an aim to elect half of all new fellows from groups currently underrepresented in the fellowship for every year between now and 2026. And our goal is to achieve a fellowship that embodies the full breadth and diversity of engineering excellence by the time we reach our 50th anniversary in 2026. We also know that we need to reach beyond any one single organisation to drive systemic change, cultural and administrative structures in society and in our profession too, and shared biases across companies and communities can all contribute to inequality. Systemic bias can be hard to identify and hard to address. So leaders everywhere need to step up and ask themselves that difficult, uncomfortable question: how might I be contributing to the perpetuation of systemic bias, even if it's unwittingly? How might I play a bigger part in dismantling it? And it's my belief that the engineering systems approach that is so core to our community can actually be a real asset in our efforts to do this. That ability to take a systemic view can really help us to address the issues of injustice and discrimination that are still holding our profession back from achieving our full potential, both in terms of securing the talent we need and delivering societal impact. Finally, I think it's important to say that there are many visible leaders, but also many visible, many less visible, or many invisible ones too. There are those of us who have leadership written all over our job descriptions, but also many people who provide outstanding leadership across our community, not because of their job title, but because of their personal commitment to being an agent of change for diversity and inclusion in engineering. We can all be allies to colleagues and for causes that need support, asking ourselves, how are we using our platform, our strength, our experience, our insight, our passion to promote and support others and to share whatever power and privilege is at our disposal? There are still far too many people in our profession whose voices and perspectives are under-recognised, under-supported or underrepresented. Those voices, those people are critical to our success, and we all have to play a role in ensuring they are valued and heard. So yes, engineering change by improving diversity and inclusion is an enormous, almost overwhelming theme. But as we explore it today through the lens of leadership, systems, and people in the company of colleagues and friends, I hope that we will all see ourselves as part of the change and together be able to move forwards, to harness the power of diversity, to engineer a sustainable society and an inclusive economy that works for everyone. Thank you so much. Now, for our opening panel discussion today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by 4 exceptional leaders working in very different areas of engineering technology. First of all, we have Professor Sarah Hainsworth, who's the Pro-Vice-Chancellor and Executive Dean of the School of Engineering and Applied Science, which recently won the Times Higher Education Award for Outstanding Entrepreneurial University in 2020. She's a Fellow of the Academy and was awarded an OBE in 2019 for services to engineering. Neil Smith is the Inclusive Design Lead for HS2. With over 20 years of experience in delivering inclusive environments, he was the principal author of the Mayor's Supplementary Planning Guidance Accessible London and the author of the Olympic Delivery Authority's Inclusive Design Standards. Dr. Mohammad Zamri Ibrahim is a senior lecturer from the Faculty of Electrical and Electronics Engineering at the University of Malaysia, Pahang. And he's an entrepreneur who's filed many patents. And last year, his company, Venigo, brought his newest invention to market, a vane display device, which was recently certified by the Malaysian government. And Zamri is also a participant in our Leaders in Innovation Fellowships programme. And Priya Guha is a venture partner at Meridian Ventures, a venture capital firm investing in women-led innovation. She's also a member of the Innovate UK Council and adjunct faculty at Hult Ashridge Executive Education, supporting its work on disruptive innovation and leadership. A former career diplomat, Priya was the first woman to hold the post of British Consul General in San Francisco, where she used her platform to champion technology and innovation in business. A warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining me. So, as you've heard, the theme of our discussion today is leading change, and each of you is a leader in your own right who's helping us work towards that more diverse and inclusive world that we're all seeking. So Priya, I'm going to kick off with you if I can. In engineering, we are sadly all too familiar with shocking diversity statistics, but you're very active in the startup space, which I sort of hesitate to say may have even more shocking diversity deficits. So something like just over 3% of tech funding in the UK over the past decade has gone to all female teams, and over 70% has gone to all male teams. Can you tell us, how have we got into this situation? And what is your company doing to help redress that balance?
So I think the reality is, as you said yourself in the introduction, Hayatan, this is about a whole system that has created the biases that we see today. It is clearly true that right back to where we see kids going to school from the age of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, there are biases and prejudices that come in and influence the way that they see their future. But if we switch directly to this field of investment, I think there are certain processes and the way that unconscious bias has seeped into the process of venture capital investment in particular that have cemented the sort of biases that come out and the really shocking statistics you referred to there. If you think about how venture capital emerged as an industry, it was really sort of serial founders looking to fund other founders and identifying those founders through their own personal networks. So what do? You get a perpetuation of wealth in the hands of the few that are in that very small connected bubble. So what do you actually need to do to break out from that? Well, I think, for me, the fundamental way to break out of that is to recognize that there are biases built in, and to try and look to how you address those biases in all of your processes. So whether that's in terms of making sure that your own investment committees are themselves diverse, it is actually, really shocking if you think only about 13% of senior people in investment positions in VC are women. That's a really shocking statistic, and inevitably people tend to like and associate with people who reflect themselves. But also there is a requirement to actively track the statistics around this. One of the real challenges is that historically diversity stats just haven't been measured at all. So you end up with a system by default that then brings companies to the investment committee that are following one mold, one pattern, one set of founders. So I think there's a whole realm of initiatives around unconscious bias that are being addressed by great organizations like Diversity VC, for example, that are looking to put in place practices to make sure that if you think that this is something that you want to focus on, there are really practical tips and ideas for you to do something about it.
Thank you. Yes, I think that it's been encouraging to see how much more acknowledgement there has been amongst the investment community that we're not in an okay place. But of course, there are many aspects of diversity, and intersectionality has become a much sort of more prominent part of the debate within the diversity community. But when you look at what's happening in investment, do you feel that there is enough understanding that this is not all about counting the number of women on the Zoom screen or on your board? The stats for Black entrepreneurs receiving VC funding are just horrific. I think it's something like 0.24% of total VC funding over the past decade has gone to Black entrepreneurs. Do you think there is enough focus now on other aspects of diversity, including race and ethnicity and disability, for example? And if not, how do we make sure that the progress that we make in terms of gender isn't at the exclusion of these other characteristics?
I think you're absolutely spot on. So we talked at the beginning there about the statistics relating to gender in investment. What was really stark is when we started to talk about those statistics and look at how we might address them. When people started trying to think about, well, how does this affect Black founders, for example? We didn't have statistics in the UK that looked at the amount of funding that goes to Black founders. And that's only just through the work that's been recently brought to the fore with the importance of things like the Black Lives Matter movement that we've been able to start to look at those metrics. And they are, as you rightly say, really shocking. But it is, as you say, Hayatan, about intersectionality. What we're also seeing, you rightly flagged, the lack of investment that goes into disabled founders. We'll also need to look at actually social exclusion. How much does your own personal experience, where you've been brought up, the access to networks that you have, then impact your ability to scale and fund a business? So this is a very complex system of intersectionality that is being addressed. But the key point that I think is really, really important to take away here is that this isn't a zero-sum game. It's not that suddenly, because we know that there is a huge problem with the funding that goes into Black founders, that we then think that the gender issue is dealt with. or that the issue about LGBTQ equality is dealt with. It's not. We have a really stark reality that the amount of funding that is going into people who are bringing a level of diversity to the table, whatever that diversity might be, is not equitable. And the really important thing here for me is that, why does that matter? And it's not, in my view, just because that's the right thing to do. Clearly, in a discussion like this, I think everyone would probably agree it's the right thing to do. But it's because we're going to build better businesses. We're going to have a design focus that is inclusive and therefore addresses the whole of the potential market for that concept. But we're also going to have businesses that perform better. If you look at the McKinsey research they've done over a number of years, if you have a diverse leadership team by ethnicity, you get 36% better performance as a business. If you have a diverse leadership team by gender, that's 25% more effective business operations. So this is a no-brainer, whether you're an investor, whether you're from a policy framework, whether you're supporting the engineering sector in the broader sense. It is a no-brainer to look to have a diverse team.
I'm sure there are many people furiously nodding with you at this point. On the points we've just covered so far, particularly about intersectionality, would anyone else like to come in from the panel? I've got one more question for you, Priya, after that. But if Sarah or Zamri or Neil, any of you want to come back on intersectionality specifically, please do feel free to give me a wave. Neil, you look like you might be on the brink.
No, I think, it's been interesting over the years of working in this field that there's been a focus on silos, not recognizing actually that it's important we need to break out of those silos and recognize that you're not just disabled, you are disabled and you are BAME, or it's important that we can't disconnect them and say we're going to solve that area and not deal with it. We have to bring it all together and move it forward.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Did anyone else want to come in on that? Sarah, did you want to come in?
So I think I would just say that, one of the challenges when you're trying to build leadership teams is about getting that experience on there. My senior management team in my college is 43, just over 43% by gender, female representation. It's about 23% BAME. And that's something I would like to improve. I think it's better than the national average at the moment, but it's definitely something I'd like to move in a different direction. And for me, it's about getting that exposure to leadership at early career stages for people, and making sure that when you're looking at who your future leaders are going to be, that you're looking at diversity in that group, because the challenge is, if that group's not diverse, you won't change going forwards the diversity of your management team. So I think you've got to focus on all elements of this to make sure that you achieve that diversity.
Absolutely, thank you, Sarah. And that brings us on really nicely to my last question for Priya, for now, which is that we've been talking so far primarily about the investment side, but there's lots of innovation that takes place within companies. And so, you've passionately made the case for the value that comes from having diverse teams, inclusive cultures. What advice do you give to business leaders who perhaps have oversight of it's entrepreneurial activity, innovation activity within companies? How do you want them to behave in order to be part of stimulating this more accessible innovation activity that leads to more inclusive outcomes?
So I think, there is a real onus on any leader in a corporate business to be thinking about how they stay relevant. What we've seen in the pandemic is a huge acceleration of technological innovation. And actually, there is a real risk that larger, more established players will be left behind in that journey because of the new innovation that's coming through, particularly from the startup sector. So as a corporate leader, if you want to stay relevant, there is nothing better to do than think of how you create an environment within your company that really fosters creative energy and innovation. And how do you get creativity? Well, one of the central tenets to getting creativity within your teams is to be inclusive about who you include in conversations, who you include in discussions. Now that's the very high level, but when you break that down to what does that mean, I think it requires us all to take a really good hard look at ourselves, to look at the structures that we've set up. Is the way that you run a meeting the correct way to bring all voices to that table? Is the way that you run a brainstorming session the right way to bring voices to the table? Is the way that you support and develop talent the right way to bring all voices to the table? And I think the reality is there's a lot of really great best practice out there where we can challenge ourselves and we can look to do things differently. They might not all work, but that's okay. Actually, what you want to do is be experimental, create a culture, and where you are successful in what you do, support and shout about that. To Sarah's point, it's really powerful when leaders are walking the talk and celebrating the benefits of that diverse and inclusive approach to how you work. And that will really make the difference, and share it amongst colleagues. One of the great things about today's discussion, I hope, is that we'll get lots of examples of best practice that people can take away and implement in their own teams. But fundamentally for me, this is a make or break for the corporates of the future. If they don't do this, you won't be relevant in the future.
Thank you, Priya. That's some really clear, articulate messages for us to take away. And we'll come back to some of those themes in a minute, but certainly your points around how critical this is to business success, the importance of data, the importance of taking systems approach, all absolutely things we recognise. Now, Zamri, we've been talking about innovators and entrepreneurs, and here you are, a real live entrepreneur who's been focusing your time and your talents on the medical devices sector. Can you tell us a bit about your experience of being an innovation entrepreneur, particularly your journey in Venigo, and explain how diversity and inclusion has been relevant to that journey, please?
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. My name is Zamri. I'm from university. I'm working as an academician, and I turned from academician into entrepreneur. So this has happened 5 years ago when my mother actually admitted to the hospital to the brain cancer. So when I visit her at the hospital, I saw on her skin actually a lot of dark spot because of the blood withdrawal process. So it means that the medical staff cannot see the vein on my mother's skin and accidentally punch it at the wrong vein. And this has happened a lot of time because the skin is dark, and then a lot of this nurse and also doctor is not really experienced doing all these things. So I'm looking, this is part of the group that actually because of the different skin color and because of the set of training and also lack of ability of equipment in the hospital cause this problem. So and also this there are a lot of equipment in the other hospital, but it is very expensive, and because it's expensive, and then it cannot be used at many hospitals. So this is one of the reasons, because the medical product is very expensive and cannot be used, cannot be brought by hospital, and then a lot of people cannot have access to it. So this is a problem that I seen 5 years ago. So I thought, why don't I use my expertise in my computer vision to develop a device that can help solve this problem and helping a society. So I pitched to my Malaysian government, and then I win a business competition. So I get about $500,000 to start my business. So I don't have money. I ask a fund from the government. They see this project have an impact to the society, to the country overall, and they grant me $500,000 to start my project, to build a device and deliver it to society. So the product called vein display instrument. So we solve the inclusion needs for the people with the dark skin color. As you know, Malaysia, we have many race. We have a Malay, we have a Chinese, we have an Indian race, and also other than that, we have even minority ethnic. So we have many skin color, and then most of the equipment actually researched from the Western country, which not include some of the criteria or group in the ASEAN country, for example. So this is so the product actually has been developed, as fully certified by Malaysian government, and now already in the market and been brought by a few hospitals to test. And I seen that it's benefit to the society. from this innovation.
That's wonderful. And Zamri, you know, this is a perfect example of truly inclusive design. Do you think there is a trade-off between building projects that are driven by inclusion and focusing exclusively on profit? There is still some debate about this. So tell us, what do you think?
Okay, of course, when you work with the social entrepreneurship, so somehow people, I talk with a lot of group in my country. So when we talk about a product that help people, they say, oh, if you want to help people, why don't you sell it at a cheaper price? So if I sell it at cheaper price, where I get my profit? So this is kind of the dilemma happening in the entrepreneurship area. So are you going to help people? Are you going to get a profit from it? So of course, there is a trade-off when you develop a product for social entrepreneurship. And then because I want this product to be deployed as many places as possible. So the first thing, I need to reduce the price. So by reducing the price, a lot of hospitals can benefit from it. A lot of hospitals can afford to buy it. But where I get all this profit? Okay, so the things that I experience is changing my business model. So I have a two-stage business model. One, I use a CSR program in Malaysia. So there are a lot of big corporate company in Malaysia. I ask them for money because they are obligated to use some of their money and then to help people in Malaysia. So from the CSR program, actually they can get benefit because of the tax deduction. So the more money they give to the society, they can claim back from the tax reduction. So the first stage of my business model is to get this CSR money, get my product into the market, and then I get a few percentage from that profit to maintain my company. So the second stage of the business model, when all the product already in the market, so I gain a lot of customer, I gain a lot of network, I gain a trust. So based on this, I can put up an additional business on top of that. So I can sell a new equipment, I can sell a new training, I can sell of course another equipment rather than just focus on the vein finder. I can put another on top of a different medical product of that. So this is the second stage of the business. So first thing is to get the product into the market, and the second step, this is the way the real profit come in after that. So as a conclusion, I would say there is a trade-off between a profit and also for the how inclusivity and product there. But you need to focus and you need to strategize how to get the profit from the first stage to the second stage, and maybe you have many stages to get to maintain your company.
It's really interesting to hear how you've navigated that, Zamri, and there are lots of sort of different versions of that dual business model where sometimes it's two different price points for different markets and that sort of thing. But I'm interested in the other panel members' view on, you know, what do you think about this issue? Are we now at a point where inclusion is fully recognized as good business? What more do we need to do to accelerate that? So I don't know if Sarah, Pri, or Neil, you have any particular reflections on that? Otherwise, I've got one more question for Zamri.
Sorry.
Yeah, continue, Priya.
Yeah, so Priya first, and then I'll come to you, Zamri.
So I really believe that inclusivity actually creates new business models. So this perceived conflict between a diverse product in its design and the way that Zamri's identified is actually identifying a new market. We've seen this time and time again, whether it's a product that's looking at different hair and how can you actually create a shampoo that works for different types of hair, or whether you're actually looking at a medical product that addresses maybe female health in a way that has been ignored historically. Those are actually identifying and building from new markets. And I think what is really, really important is that actually this whole area of inclusivity in new product design is recognized as expanding and creating the horizons for new products and new markets, rather than somehow limiting yourself. And I think, Zamri's example is a prime example of something where, he's created a whole new market for a product that just had been ignored historically in the past.
Great. Well, I think we're going to build on this, actually. We're going to talk to Neil in just a minute. But first of all, Zamri, before we do that, I just wanted to know if you had any advice for other people who are in your position, because, you've done brilliantly to build this network of investors, champions, corporates who are working with you to make sure your product gets to market. Do you have any advice for other budding social entrepreneurs who are trying to justify this kind of investment to shareholders or to investors?
Okay. When we talk about the shareholder, of course, they put a lot of money to your company. So if they put a lot of money to your company, they expect a money back in the return and plus the profit. So they say, this is the investor. So they want the money back and also the profit. So but there are some of them, they have a different vision. Sometimes they're just a philanthropist. They want to give money to people and help it out. But some of them, they try to make money from what PR said is a new market segment there. So my advice to the business leader, I have two advice. One is about the multiple business model. So when you work with the people, you cannot based on the one single model to get everything that done. You need to look at the market, see how actually it can fit into at different stages. So first, you need to highlight to your investor. So you need to highlight to investor what is the impact and the scale. So this when you talk to investor, you talk about the impact and the scale. So when you talk to the shareholder, you talk about money return and the traction. So when you talk with the people, you have a different narrative. So this is how you justify to your shareholder. You talk about these things. When you talk to the investor, you talk about different things. But actually, everything is the same understanding. The second thing is, my advice to the business leader is you need to stay true to your mission. So you need to find balance between the profit and also social contribution. You cannot get a profit and then you took away all this social contribution. And then there's, our mankind rely much on the technology. So that's why it's very important to make sure that your client, your customer, your shareholder, your society see what you are doing and what change you are making. So to make yourself visible and to see what impact you have done to the society. This is very important. So the change of the mindset thing is very important because, different country, they have a different, I would say the culture. I think Western country, I think in UK, they have a different culture. I think in Malaysia, they also have a different culture, the way of thinking. So there is no one formula to fit everything. So we need to look back and see what is the culture and then work on that things. Okay.
Great, thank you, Zamri, for sharing your experience and some great messages to walk away with around really staying true to what you believe in and tailoring your messaging to your audience and to your culture. That's fantastic. Thank you, Zamri. And I'm going to turn now to Neil. You're doing something very different. You're working at the heart of one of the most ambitious, complex engineering projects that's underway at the moment, HS2 obviously. And as the inclusive design lead, you've got a very, very important role in making sure that decisions take into account the needs of diverse groups. So what are the sorts of issues that you're trying to resolve and how are they bringing about benefits to your customers, to HS2, to those impacted by the infrastructure? How on earth do you balance those all off? Love to hear more, Neil, please.
Yes, it's quite a challenge. I mean, HS2, I think, is Europe's largest infrastructure project. We'll be connecting there's going to be 25 stops. We'll connect 8 cities. It's about 30 million people that we will be connecting as part of this process. And the heart of that, that's 30 million. If we don't address the needs of people, that's 30 million people that we're not addressing. And so that the diversity of that has to be recognised as part of our process. So I think what is important for us, and going right back to the start, was actually having an inclusive design policy as part of the model for delivering HS2. So it's there right from the start. It's not something that we're adding on. It's something that is integrated. And I think, any major project, I think, has an obligation to think about its impact on people and what needs to be done. And inclusive design has to be at the heart of that. In terms of it, thinking about it as a business, it's also business critical. If we don't address the needs of our passengers aren't going to want to use us. And that means not just addressing the average passenger. It's about understanding our passengers' needs, going through that whole process of engagement and consultation as part of that, and reflecting on that feedback, and measuring that. One of I'm really proud of is that, you know, HS2 has just been awarded platinum by the Clear Assured. You know, that the Clear Assured is looking at EDI, and one of the evidence pieces that we used was our approach to inclusive design of Curzon Street Station, and demonstrating how engaging all the different protected characteristics was an exemplar. Rather, you know, so we are pushing what we want to achieve with that. We're not doing what is industry norm. Industry has to change. You know, we have to think about, you know, what are people's experience is going to be, how is that going to be changed as we progress. But I think it's also recognizing that it's not just about our passengers, it's all about HS2 as well. You know, we need to think about the diversity of our workforce, therefore where we're delivering our depots and our maintenance facilities. How are we are also making sure that those are being designed to meet our inclusive design standards and technical criteria, in order to make sure that we can encourage, build facilities to encourage a diverse workforce. So we're not, you know, making sure that we don't exclude. I think one of the things I think is very important for our industry is, you know, we need to have a workforce that reflects the communities that we are delivering for, and if we don't actually address the inclusivity of our workplace, we cannot then encourage that talent that's then going to deliver the final product. So it's mission critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've obviously done really sort of deep thinking about what inclusive design means for a very large scale complex infrastructure project. But presumably this is actually, there's a principle behind this that could underlie all of engineering and all of design. Yeah. And so for those who are less close to it, what are those sort of just underlying principles that you would like to see all engineers adopt as they go about their work, whatever branch of engineering they work in?
I think the starting point is, and we need to constantly think about this, because I'm still learning about people. I don't understand everybody. I've got to ask some very stupid questions to get to understand. But the first point is actually just putting people right at the heart of the process. I think, as we work in engineering, we work with standards and criteria and numbers, but actually people aren't black and white. That intersectionality we've talked about, we need to, there is an element of just stepping back and thinking about the impact it's going to have on the people that will be thinking about this. Acknowledge that we're all there's diversity. There isn't one product that meets all solutions. So we need to build into that the ability to think about choice. And actually, how can we offer those different choices, address people's different preferences? I think from if we think of it from a built environment approach, how do we make sure that people have an equitable experience? Their experiences will be different because of their access requirements. But how do we make sure that though they may be taking a different route through, that route has the same equity of experience to get to the final end, and thinking about that. So that's all about, there's about flexibility, but it's also about safety and providing a safe environment where people feel safe. And that's not always a physical thing, that it can be an emotional safety as well. I think that there are lots of different elements. I think there is, for people wanting to move into this journey and understanding what inclusive design is, I think one of the pieces of work I've been involved is with the Construction Industries Council's Diversity Inclusion Panel is a roadmap for change. And that's a toolkit for the construction industry to start to think about EDI, and within that, how we address inclusive design and building that into our processes.
Great. Maybe someone can pop a link to that in the chat, actually. I mean, I often think it's actually inclusive design surely is an extension of the idea that's fundamental to engineering, which is you must understand your user. And it's a sort of, it's extending that to just make sure that we have a really human view of this and think of, you know, it's an empathetic approach. You think about how both the people involved in the teams and the people who are impacted by the design might experience it, might be affected, might be impacted, might benefit. That's really interesting. So my last question for you, Neil, is that, you know, one of the challenges in all of this is that, you know, we on the panel obviously fully signed up to this agenda, but we know that not everybody is yet as convinced as we are that this is an absolute business imperative. It's not an option. It's an absolute responsibility that we all have. We've got a lovely mixed audience today. Some people at much earlier career stages. So what would you, what advice could you give to those perhaps who are not in senior roles yet? How can they help people who are more senior, those who are in the leadership positions, to become more aware of the challenges being faced by diverse colleagues, to behave exactly as you've described as being necessary for inclusive design?
It's an interesting one because, yeah, in my previous role, while I was working in an engineering company consultancy, one of the groups I kind of was involved with new graduates really wanting a voice, and they set up a network, which was the FAIR network, the Fairness, Awareness, Inclusion and Respect network. You know, they wanted to address diversity. What was important in that was the partners gave them the voice and gave them validity, and so it wasn't just a group of people come together to want to make change. It was actually then being accepted that that was a valid voice within the decision-making process, and to give them a platform and to actually give them sponsorship. So I think it was two-way relationship. You need to be given the opportunity. So I think the reverse mentoring process, I think, is a critical one, and I think it's critical that leaders recognize that they need reverse mentoring to develop, and otherwise they are going to lose that talent. You know, if that hadn't happened, there were some incredible engineers and they would have gone to somewhere else that would have listened and wanted their voice. So I think, you know, it has to be a two-way relationship, but I think it's important to recognize for people early on that their voice is important, and their lived experience and their desire for change is very important, and not to lose that desire.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Neil. I'm going to move on to Sarah now, but we're going to have some time at the end for questions for everyone. I've seen some great comments coming through in the chat from the audience. If you have a question you'd like to put to the audience, please do pop it in the chat and I'll try and get through a few of them. So Sarah, over to you next. Now, you're an educator who's really at the heart of training the next generation of engineering talent in the UK. And across the higher education system and further education, we know that there's an attainment gap currently between Black engineering students and their white counterparts. And some of the work you've been doing at Aston has been focused on reducing that gap. So can you tell us about what you've discovered and what you found works?
Yeah, so you know, there's quite a large attainment gap. You know, if you look at the data on advanced HE, typically in the UK, about 81% of students get a first or a 2-1. For BAME students, that's about 68%. So that's a significant gap. At Aston, in my college last year, it was 4%, and for the university as a whole, it was 6%. So, you know, we do have a much smaller attainment gap than other areas. We've been looking at how we improve the outcomes for all of our students, but in particular looking at what factors lead to that attainment gap and how we can better support students to achieve a parity of outcomes. And there's a number of things that we know that we do. So, for example, one of the important parts of our offer is for all students to do placements, and we find that that's a really important part of the students' development. Really motivates them. They come back and they really understand why they need to achieve great results. But we also do interventions much earlier, because what we do is, for example, in our computer science department, we have been doing diagnostic tests when students come to university around mathematical ability. And we see that some students have weaker mathematical backgrounds than other students. And so all of those students who don't do well in that test are offered tutoring, some extra sessions to improve their mathematical ability. Those extra sessions are student-led. We find in particular that the uptake of those is particularly strong again with our female students, that they're really engaged with us on that. And there's a really strong correlation then between those students who engage with those sessions and who get better degree outcomes. So it's about understanding for us the root cause of why students might not do well, and then putting those interventions in place early so that they have a strong platform to get their final degree outcomes as strong as possible. But I would say it's a mixture of measures, and you've got to really understand for individual, you know, we talk about diversity and inclusion sometimes as if people are all the same, and that is not the case. People are individuals and they have individual needs and individual challenges. And I think one of our real challenges is to make the appropriate intervention for the right student, so much more targeted, and trying to support the students to get the needs that they need to be successful.
That's such a great point, Sarah. I could see lots of enthusiastic grins and nods from the fellow panelists. And, you know, we obviously pride ourselves, the Academy, but often in the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, of being data driven. And we have to remember it's also making sure that's at the level of granularity that is relevant to the specific challenge you're trying to tackle. Now, Sarah, in addition to your role at Aston, you are, of course, also the chair of the Academy's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And so you're fully embedded in our efforts to diversify, for example, our fellowship through the Fellowship Fit for the Future campaign. Why do you think this is important? What are your aspirations for that campaign?
You know, I think that as the national body for engineering, the Royal Academy should reflect the makeup of engineers across the UK. That has changed, and perhaps the fellowship has changed more slowly because of the requirements needed on individuals to achieve fellowship status. And I think sometimes it has not led people to think about the diversity aspect of the fellowship. And I think going forwards, we will be a better, more effective academy if we look like the modern engineering workforce and society. You know, we serve society as engineers, and we need to be aware of society's needs. Society evolves, so the fellowship needs to evolve as well at the same time.
Absolutely. And talking of another area which my sort of prejudice, which I'm quite happy to admit to, I also think needs to evolve, is focusing specifically on academia, because I still frequently, to my great regret, come across a sort of lingering perception in academia that there is a trade-off between diversity and inclusion and excellence, and that focusing more on diversity and inclusion will lead to less excellence in our research base. And I find that really disappointing. You forged a hugely successful career as an engineer, as an academic leader, but you're also absolutely known for, identified as, a wonderful advocate for diversity and inclusion. So how can we make that something that's more common amongst our academic leadership? How can we create the kind of the confidence in academic leadership that diversity is a necessary condition for excellence rather than something that dilutes it?
So I think probably my starting point is that why would it not be diverse? And so, you know, I don't see, and this resonates with some of the comments in the chat, diversity is not an add-on, it is part of who we are. So within my teams, it's not just about me being passionate about diversity and inclusion, it's also about the remaining people in my management team being passionate about diversity and inclusion, and for them to be spreading it out across the rest of my college and the rest of the university. There is, as far as I can tell, no correlation between research excellence and diversity. There is no study that shows that diverse colleagues do not produce excellent research. So, you know, I don't understand really where that sense comes from. And I think that having that diverse, creative challenge within your team is really critical to being excellent and moving forward in a really positive way.
Yeah, I go further and say I don't understand how we can claim something's excellent if it doesn't if it doesn't embody characteristics of diversity. I've already shared enough of my personal views on this. Let's go back to the other questions. So before I move on to some of the audience questions, did anyone want to add anything quickly to any of the points that Sarah or Neil made on the panel? Because I didn't give you the chance to do that. No, you're all smiling very happily, so let's keep going. So we're getting some nice questions in from our audience, and I'm going to ask you to give relatively crisp responses so we can try and get a few in. So Luke Logan has asked whether you see COVID-19 as a catalyst to accelerating our journey towards inclusive and then more diverse employment and employers. Who'd like to dive in on that one?
I'm happy to kick off on that one, Hayton, if that's okay. I'm actually really worried about the impact of COVID-19. I see it potentially going in the other direction for two reasons. The first is because in terms of the impact of the pandemic from across the broader economy, it tends to be hitting lower paid jobs. Those are jobs that tend to be from people who are underrepresented, whether that's, for example, women. In the US, in the last quarter of the year, last year, the 140,000 jobs that were lost in the economy were lost by women. And we're seeing a very similar effect here. So I think we need to be really conscious of that. The second point is that in the rush to make the sorts of interventions that were necessary to sustain the economy, the importance of tracking diversity and inclusion in those interventions has been made a secondary consideration, if a consideration at all. So I don't think we are tracking that effectively. I don't think we're seeing this as an opportunity to nudge in the right direction. So I am worried, and I think we need to really be focusing on this and making sure that we're not setting ourselves back a decade by what we've been doing.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Priya. Anyone else want to jump in on this? Neil, did you want to come in?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think again, I've got similar concerns. What COVID has actually has really highlighted is inequalities, you know, and the impact it's had on, you know, and we look at some of the gut reactions to the solutions actually have not addressed or thought about the needs, for example, of disabled people. And actually disabled people, I think, have been significantly impacted by COVID, just in terms of statistically, just deaths for a start. The percentage of deaths of disabled people within this. So I think it's important. On the flip side, I think it also potentially has demonstrated there are opportunities. You know, there are many people who have been excluded from the workplace that actually now we're using the technology that would benefited them from being excluded. You know, so it is. I think there are, you know, talking to many people who couldn't get the job because they couldn't get into the workplace because the infrastructure wasn't accessible enough to get them into the front door. So actually that has opened up opportunities that we also we must recognize the benefit of and not lose that. But I think still, yeah, the negative impact I think are far greater, and we really need to build that into our thought processes much better rather than the gut reactions that have occurred.
Absolutely, Neil. I'd just like to ask Zamri, does the situation look any different in Malaysia?
Oh yeah, because when we having a COVID-19, so a lot of the employment rate is getting higher because people lost a job because of business cannot go, and then because of business closing down, because of the shortage of the supply chain. So a lot of things happen, and then even the small startup cannot survive because sometimes of their market segment suddenly disappear because of the COVID-19. And then somehow the people working on this segment, and then when COVID-19 happened, and then everyone lost their job. So, but I believe this is also the important point, because when a lot of people lost their job, actually the government starts to see certain inclusive group. They see, okay, this group, this. Sorry.
I'm sorry, Zamri.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
we're muted now.
Okay, so when a lot of things happen, like a lot of there's no work there, the employment rate is getting higher, then government starts to see, okay, then we found this is a B40, the bottom 40 income from the government, so a bottom 50 and so on. So this like setting a reset point, so people government start to look back, oh, what is the missing, which group didn't get benefit, which group need to help. So it's like a good starting point by, it's like resetting the whole concept of things. So I believe it's a good thing. What happened with is the COVID scenario actually bring some benefit to the inclusive group, because before this group no one give attention to them. And then when we have a COVID-19, then we start to think, oh, there are a lot of people actually didn't get benefit from the government because of this and this and this. So this is also a good thing for the inclusive group.
Yeah, I think Zamri, that is a really important point, that we are now acutely aware. None of us can claim we didn't realize the depth of inequality in society. And so it comes back to our point about leadership, that if that leadership is has inclusion embedded in it, there are things that we can do that will create something positive out of this traumatic and horrific situation. I'm going to switch topic now. Oh, sorry, Sarah. Yes, come in.
Sorry, can I just come in and just say, one of the things that concerns me about the economic challenges that we face as we come out of COVID is around the impact on young people and employment. And I think that's really something where, looking at students going out from universities with good degrees, how can we help them in terms of gaining their first employment? And I think that's something where the Academy's Graduate Engineering Engagement Programme has a real role to play. But I think that preparing our students to enter employment in these challenging economic times is going to be really important for us. And the success of that will help feed into a more diverse workforce.
Absolutely. That's a really important point. Thank you, Sarah. I want to switch topic now. We have Aleida Rios asking about neurodiversity. And, we talked earlier about the slight tendency in diversity and inclusion to focus on one protected characteristic and then another. And neurodiversity is something that perhaps hasn't really been embraced yet sufficiently within the engineering narrative around diversity and inclusion. So Aleida would like to hear your perspectives on what we need to do to access the neurodiverse talent pipeline for engineering and ensure that neurodiverse talent within engineering can achieve their full potential. So I don't know, Neil, would you like to come in on this?
Yeah, I mean, it takes me back to when I was working on an engineering campus, and the head of education said, the one challenge you have as a design team is to recognise the neurodiversity of both my staff and my students, and there is no design standard for that. But you need to, that needs to be implicit within design brief. So I think what is reassuring is that there will be a PAS on Design for the Mind coming out this year that will start to highlight that, because I think one of my other jobs is I sit on the British Standard Committee B559, which looks after the British Standard for Accessible and Inclusive Environments. And when we updated the standard in 2018, one of the things that we couldn't really address was neurodiversity, because we didn't have the research and the data to provide us with that could then carry forward to reflect properly in design. I think there's some really good examples of organisations such as the BBC who've really grappled with this and what that means for their workforce and developed their standards around neurodiversity. So I think, and it's something that I think, for HST, it's something we're looking at in terms of our design standards. How can, when the PAS comes out, how can we proactively build that in? But I think, the challenge is that, again, in neurodiversity is the diversity, one, and recognizing there isn't one solution. Everybody has an individual response.
Thank you, Neil. That's really helpful. Would anyone else like to come in on this question, panel? Sarah?
So if I could just say, one of the things at Aston that we're doing is we're part of the Institute of Coding, and the Institute of Coding had a really important program on looking at neurodiversity for computing and tech skills. And one of the things there is about trying to get embedded communication skills into students so that they do well when they present themselves for interviews, but also thinking about how different people learn. And actually, we don't all learn in the same way, and some learn better with other routes than others. So it's about, again, that diversity of approaches in terms of the way in which material is presented that students engage with, but also thinking about that wider community. It's not just the kind of 18 to 21-year-old students that are coming through, but actually in terms of diversity, you need to go and upskill people who are already out there in jobs. And so I think it's challenging, but it's about multiple diversity of approaches, thinking about communication skills, thinking about how people with different learning methods and abilities can engage with the wider workforce as they come through.
I think if I can just add one point to what Sarah said, I think, you know, the additional point there, which I think is implicit in what Sarah was saying, but just to underline it, is that this goes back to school. And I think the reality is, in the UK at least, and probably in many countries around the world, we have systems of education that do a disservice to the next generations that are coming through, because we are not developing the sorts of tailored learning experience that will bring the best out of everybody. We're also not giving them the skills that they will need to survive in a future of work, which will be constantly changing and evolving. And I think, you know, we collectively, as a generation that have ownership over how education works, have an obligation to do something about that.
Thank you, Priya. I see again lots of support for that across the panel. I think we're coming towards the end of the questions, but there's a question from Deborah Fernshaw about data, and data's come up a few times. And Deborah's asking, how can we help organisations to actually capture data so that they can then make informed policy decisions? So it can actually be quite hard to persuade people to provide data. And of course, there are sort of the GDPR privacy concerns and things like that. But do you have any examples of how you've successfully encouraged people to provide you with the diversity data that will help any organisation to make better decisions in relation to their activities? Neil, yes, please.
That data is incredibly important to HS2. It's implicit within our processes to get EDI data and use that, be transparent about it and publish it. But we also, through procurement, that drives down through our supply chain as well. So we have our supply chain data as well. Mm-hmm. And it's important that we collect that so we can, again, it's about demonstrating benefit, but identifying where there are gaps and then targeting those gaps.
Thank you, Neil.
So I think procurement is a really powerful tool.
Just to sort of maybe extend that slightly, I think you mentioned at the beginning that I am also on the Council of Innovate UK, and one of the initiatives that Innovate UK has recently introduced is as part of the grant process to actually make ED&I reporting a compulsory part of that process, rather than a peripheral sort of add-on that is optional for people to want to fill out. So I think it's probably a similar point to what Neil's saying around procurement, that actually companies, organisations large and small, have an ability to actually influence not only how their organisation works, but the community around them. Thank you, Priya. And Sarah or Zamri, do you have any examples that you'd like to share?
Oh, okay. So basically, the data is very important. So basically, when we work with the inclusive group, for example, this is when I talk about this is about the innovation in the business. When we talk about the data, so if we look to the people who are called as the extreme user is a group of people that didn't get benefit left over from the sort of the system. For example, if we are working at the banking system, so the extreme user is the people with a disability. So if we work with the people with disability, we improve the overall service for this as a disability group. Basically, we improve the overall process of it, everything. So the data is really very important. But the question is, where actually to get sort of data? Are they willing to give away the data itself? So in my experience, basically just asking for the people who are really needs, we go around and ask for this data, then we classify this data actually is the group that inclusive that gonna help us. So the group from inclusive group, the data for the inclusive group actually is our innovation. So when we try to solve this part, actually we innovate the technology for it.
Thank you, Zamri. That's very helpful. And Sarah, any last thoughts? This is going to be the final word from the panel.
Final word. Well, I think just to all the people that are listening in, I just really hope that you can take some of the things that we've said this morning and take them away and embed them into your practice. Because actually it's not just the people on the panel who have responsibility for this, it's everybody together, and we all need to be pulling this together, I think. So it's more of a global message to everybody on the side chat to make sure that you take personal responsibility as well.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I'd like to also just pick up one point that was made in the chat that we didn't get time to discuss, but it was about this issue of excellence and whether actually we do have a problem. I mean, should we be happy with all that engineering has achieved? Well, I think we should be proud of all the great things we've achieved, but actually let's challenge ourselves on what does excellence look like? And to me, excellence means that the engineering that we undertake can really meet the needs of society and all the different groups within society. And actually there, I'm afraid we do fall short. And so there are myriad examples of products and services that haven't equitably delivered benefit across different parts of society. We know that there are markets that we haven't reached and therefore haven't been served. Zamri's example was a really concrete one of how you respond to that market gap. But also we have a long-standing skill shortfall. How can we feel confident that we are being excellent when we can't attract the diversity and the numbers of talented people we need to be our future engineering workforce? So in my view, whilst we can be very proud of what we have achieved, there is so much more to do, and there'll be some fantastic inputs later on. For example, talking about how our sustainability impact has fallen short in engineering. This is not about being negative, but it's about saying, we have to be honest, we have to see things as they are in order to make progress. So I'd like to thank our wonderful panel for all providing some great insights, for being really, really practical in their inputs, for their passion and their commitment to the cause. I found this very inspiring to be part of this conversation, and I hope that this has also been interesting and engaging for those listening. Thank you all for your useful inputs as well on the chat function. That always brings these events to life. And I want to end by just saying that, one of our goals for today is not that everyone thinks, yeah, that was a nice chat, I enjoyed that, but that it does lead to action. So I would love every one of us here to go away, not only having thought hard, having had perspectives challenged, but also with that concrete action in mind, so that we can go on to effect greater change, faster change in our own context. And so to help stimulate that, we've ask you to commit to one of the event pledges, and there's a link that's just popped up now in the chat function. Please do have a look and think about what your commitment to action is going to be before you go and take your coffee break. Do it in the right order. And then for those of you who are attending the 11:30 seminars, please follow the links which should be in your joining instructions email. I will be making sure that my colleague Lucy stays in this virtual room to rescue any stray people who haven't landed where they thought they might, or haven't made up their minds for the last minute. So Lucy will be there to look after you. But once again, thank you all so much. And can I ask you all to give a virtual round of applause to our fantastic panelists, Priya, Zamri, Neil and Sarah. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a really good day, everybody. Bye-bye.